Okay, so let's transition a little bit here because I know that you work with people who are getting assessed for autism.
Yes.
And there's a lot of overlap between autism and ADHD. And I just wanted to hear your thoughts about that. Like, what are the similarities? What are some similarities? And what are some differences between autism and ADHD?
Yeah, so there is a lot of overlap, and like distinguishing between the two can be a little bit tricky. So, where things are the same, you often see executive dysfunction with both. So, struggles with time management, organization, planning, working memory, etc. You can have sensory sensitivities in both. Usually, the degree of like distress or disruption from it is higher with autism, but I mean, both can be pretty hard. Um, You can see relational impacts
Mm.
in both. So, like, some ADHDers have like a hard time with reining in the impulsivity and then like want to talk about the things they're hyperfixated on. And then it gets a little bit like annoying for some of the people around them from time to time if there isn't that self awareness. And so you can see some social differences with both, but the key differences I think are in like how that feels internally. And so for autistic folks, like, they just have differences in how they communicate and differences in like what kinds of social interactions feel really good to them. And so it's usually less about like reining in impulsivity and more about like feeling out of sync with people until they find their people.
Mm.
So it's a lot of like I hear a lot of folks mentioning things like I feel like people got a rule book for what they're supposed to do in a context, and like I just didn't get that rule book, so I had to learn it.
Yeah.
And that right there is, again, where like the internal experience matters more than the observation. Because like if you're an adult who hasn't been diagnosed yet, you're probably pretty high masking, which means you probably have learned to do pretty well in social situations from an external perspective. But internally, it's so exhausting and it's so much active thought. And you're maintaining the eye contact, but you're thinking about, okay, how long have I been making this eye contact? Is it too long? Is it too intense? Do I look away? Do I need to look at you again?
Mhm.
Um, and it's all this like active thought. So, like I think one of the good distinguishing factors is like how much active mental effort is it taking to do some of those social pieces that for neurotypicals or allistic, meaning non-autistic people, is more like a automatic implicit process.
Yeah.
So they're not putting the same thought to it.
Hmm.
So I think that's one of the distinguishing factors. With autism, you usually see a little bit more of the like sensory sensitivities being like disruptive and exhausting. Um, can still happen with ADHD though, so that's a kind of a fine line. And then a lot more preference for like sameness and routine. ADHD brains like do really well with not sameness, with routine,
Yeah.
because we need that structure.
Yeah.
The sameness part is a little less appealing to us because we're always like dopamine seeking. We always want like the
100%.
next shiny thing.
Yep.
For autistic brains, like their brains are processing so much information all the time that they're on overload. And so routines and sameness like provide some mental relief. And so that preference for the sameness, which like gets pathologized as being like rigid, is actually like trying to give your brain a break. If you know exactly what something's going to taste like, you don't have to put like brain cells towards that, and you get to like breathe a little.
Okay, so this is so interesting. I have a son who was recently diagnosed with autism. And one of the things that he said in recent years, as he's gotten older and just had more language to express himself, he wants things to remain the same, even when it's not necessarily a good thing. Be- And he'll say, like, I just want it to stay the same. And I'm like, but it's not working. And he's like, I don't care. It doesn't matter. So, like, for example, he goes to bed at a certain time, no matter how tired he is, no matter how well he slept the night before, no matter what the circumstance, no matter what time he has to get up the next morning, it's the same bedtime. And I'm just like, but like, you could go to bed earlier because like you're tired. And he's like, no, I go to bed at this time. I'm just like, I don't understand. So that's actually really, really helpful to hear you say that because I've learned so much about his experience from him, but that is something that he hasn't been able to verbalize is like it being the same is actually like a relief. And it makes it so that I don't have to put brain cells toward, I wonder what time I should go to bed. It's like
Mhm.
I go to bed at this time every night, no matter what is happening. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I think that's one of the, like, when we're talking about like misconceptions around these diagnoses and like
Mm-hmm.
more like ableist or judgmental like
Mm-hmm.
interpretations of that, like, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
what you hear is like they're unnecessarily rigid. They're really stubborn. They won't
Mm-hmm.
change. They're only focused on what they need.
Mm.
And that's so unfair because
Yeah.
they aren't. They just like need a brain break. And so like when something is predictable and the same and follows the same pathway, it's easier. It's less
Mm.
draining. It is like one more thing in a world that is continuously overwhelming and unpredictable
Yeah.
that they've got like a handle on.
Yes. Wow. That was really helpful for me. That's
Yeah.
really, really beautiful. Did you know that most ADHDers are perfectionists? In fact, Dr. Russell Ramsey with his team at UPenn found that perfectionism is the most common thought distortion for adults with ADHD. Isn't that shocking? I mean, of all of the wild thoughts that we struggle with, perfectionism is the most common for ADHDers. Now, you might be thinking, how is it possible that I'm a perfectionist? I mean, I'm a mess and I do absolutely nothing perfectly. But what Ramsey found in his research and what I've seen in my experience coaching thousands of adults with ADHD is that the desire to get things right and the fear of failure lead to avoidance, procrastination, and paralysis. And I know as someone with ADHD, you struggle with avoidance, procrastination, and paralysis. So ADHDer, I've put together a 4-part course for you for free that will help you to understand your perfectionistic tendencies and overcome them in an ADHD-friendly way so that you can get shit done. I mean, that's what we all want, right? So click the link in the episode description for this totally free course. It's a 4-part video series that I've already taken my ADHD clients through. So it's tested, we know it works, and it doesn't suck. We have a great time. So click the link in the description to check it out. For you as someone who is assessing people who are coming in and they're just like, is it autism? Is it ADHD? Is it both? I don't know. How do you unpick that? How do you because there's so much overlap between it.
Yes.
So I don't know if you're allowed to say, because I know there's like test security and stuff like that, but like, how do you, as someone who is sitting face to face with a neurodivergent person, trying to help them to figure out like, is this autism? Is it ADHD? Is it both? How do you figure that out?
It takes a lot of time and like conversation and digging into things. And so that's why like if somebody is doing an autism assessment that takes an hour, like there's no way.
Oh, you mean if someone goes for an assessment and it's just like bada bing, bada boom, like no.
Yeah, no, because like like I can't even talk to you for an hour.
I
Like
know,
I just like, how am I going to cover your whole life and all the things?
That's so true.
The best way to do it in a way that's affirming as well versus coming from like a medicalized deficit-based model
Yeah.
is to like really dig into like the different parts of their life and how they're showing up in different ways. So there's like a lot of great measures out there that are more affirming in nature that are kind of more like semi-structured interview style. And so they're going to tease apart the parts where it's like, is this like seeking new stimulation? Is this like the dopamine seeking? Is this the like true just like executive functioning? Or are we seeing some of the other like social differences and preferences around sameness and some more of the stimming behaviors and those kinds of things? And so you kind of have to look at it all. It's really hard to just look at one and not the other. And because the co-occurrence rates are so high between the two, it very well could be both. And when you have both, you often feel like there's two parts of you that are at war with each other. There's the part of you that like wants the sameness and the rest, and the part of you that really wants to try the new shiny thing. And so you try the new shiny thing and then you crash. And so you're kind of like always like, it's tough, like, because the two different parts of you kind of crave different things. And I like, honestly, out of my like assessment experience, like most folks that have come to me have had both. There's some that don't, obviously.
Sure.
But the prevalence rates between the two are like really high.
Yeah.
So I think a good assessment for ADHD, should always include a screener for autism because
Wow.
like it's just like smart, I think, to look for both because like, what if like it's another one of those things where you just figured everybody struggled in the same way that you did, or that you were just different somehow, but you weren't quite sure why. So my hope is that like everybody's including a screener at least in an ADHD eval, and vice versa. Like if you're doing an autism eval, that you'd also be screening for ADHD.
Wow. I don't think that's happening.
Yeah, it probably isn't.
Okay.
It should
Like,
be.
I'm glad that you are doing it. I'm really glad you're saying it on here. I know we have a lot of clinical psychologists that listen to the podcast, and I'm glad that you're saying it because yeah, there's such a high prevalence of overlap. Like that just makes sense.
So a lot of people come to me after they've had an assessment and they get, say, an ADHD diagnosis, but then they feel like a big chunk of their experience doesn't quite get explained with that. So they still feel like something's there that's being missed. Or folks have gone for an autism assessment, been told, no, you're not autistic. And then like they read their report and they're like, are you sure? Because it kind of looks like I might be, and that kind of makes sense for me. And what's really like interesting is like in the autistic community, like self-diagnosis is completely valid. Like
Love it.
if you have questions and you're reading the things and you feel like it fits for you, awesome, that's valid. And sometimes people either need the documentation for something or like just want somebody else to validate that they're on the right track. And so then they'll come for an assessment.
Yeah.
But in my experience, and I think a lot of like psychologists will agree with this, if somebody comes to you and says, I think I might be autistic, they probably are.
Wow.
Like there's not a whole lot of allistic people that are wondering if they're autistic. And if there's something that you found out there that has really resonated with you, like you're probably onto something, but you're so used to being discounted and so used to not trusting your own experience and being told you're wrong or dramatic or sensitive.
Sure.
That like you just assume you can't possibly be right.
Wow.
And so, yeah, I mean, like I think everybody should look at both.
I just love that. I just love, and I also really love that you said, like, if you think that you're autistic, there's a high chance. Like, pull that thread.
Yeah, for sure.
For sure. Why is the autistic community so accepting of self-diagnosis? Because I think that is so beautiful.
Because it's so fucking hard to get a diagnosis.
Yeah.
One, we are not well trained for this. So we are operating off of a lot of misconceptions.
When you say
we as in psychologists.
Okay.
So, and that's true of ADHD too. So like,
talk about that a little bit.
Yes.
When you say that, what do you mean?
Yeah.
What does it mean that like you're not well trained in that?
I have a doctorate in clinical psychology. I should probably know what I'm talking about. I did not know anything about ADHD and autism. I want to
stop.
Yeah.
You didn't have a course on it.
I had, I think, 1 hour in a course that covered both as neurodevelopmental.
That covered
things.
both.
Correct. And I did not get specific training on those assessments unless I went to a training site that happened to do those assessments.
So as a clinical psychologist, you had 1 hour of one class that was dedicated to neurodevelopmental disabilities, and it covered both.
Correct.
Dang.
Unless I was a specialist in like neuropsychology.
Okay.
There wouldn't have been more coursework on it.
Man.
It was just kind of like the footnote in a course. And so like when I got diagnosed with ADHD, I did my like hyperfocus thing and did the deep dive on it. And I was astounded by how much I did not know.
Man.
And like how much learning I had to do and how much the assessments are really flawed if you're not really well versed in what ADHD looks like in women and adults.
Yeah.
Because yeah, like if you're going to a psychologist that thinks you just do the computerized clicky test,
Sure.
and that if you pass that, therefore you can't have ADHD, like that is inaccurate.
Yep.
Or if you're going off of behavioral observations, inaccurate.
Mm.
And then my son is autistic and he just got diagnosed last year. And when he got diagnosed, I did my deep dive again on autism.
As we do.
As we do. And I was again like astounded by how little I knew. And I had so many like light bulb moments for like clients I'd worked with in the past that I got stuck on because I missed that they were autistic. Because the picture I had in my head was like either like the young boy playing with the trains and like that being the thing they're obsessed with, or like Sheldon from Big Bang Theory.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Who they claim is not autistic, but let's be real.
What?
Yeah. Like
I didn't know they claimed that.
I'm pretty sure the writers said that like he wasn't
silliness.
meant to be autistic, but like he's absolutely autistic.
100%. And so is young Sheldon, obviously.
Yes.
Yes. Oh gosh, that's funny.
But I mean, like that was what was in my head too.
Yeah.
And again, psychologist here, like I should be better versed than the average human.
Dang.
And so then like learning more about what autism actually looks like and learning about it from like a neurodiversity affirming lens, as in these aren't like deficits and problems and disorders. These are just like your brain is wired differently. And so you need different things. And when you're in a context that matches that, you do just fine.
Yes.
Like you're not doomed.
Is that how we know that it's not a deficit? Is if we're in the right environment, we're actually just fine?
Yes.
Mm.
Which, like, I mean, a lot of ADHD too.
Yep.
Like when you've got the right supports in place, like you can be okay.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
But yeah, for like the autistic folks of the world, like I think we live in a society that is very unfriendly
Agreed.
for like an autistic neurotype.
Agreed.
And so like no wonder you're struggling.
Yeah.
No wonder you're struggling. But like if I could give you sensory breaks in the middle of your day, if your boss would let you work remote so you're at home, if we just told your friends to be cool with like you disappearing off the grid for a bit when you're burnt out and then coming back and
Totally.
talking about like your area of interest. Awesome. Like
We'd be good.
awesome.
Yep. Yep.
So again, like I said, I was just so astounded by how ignorant I was as I was learning about it. And so it became like really like personally important to me because like I want my kid to grow up in a world where people are affirming and that people are understanding of like the awesome shit he can do. And then also like professionally, I was so like saddened to see how few people are well versed on like what an autism diagnostic process looks like.
Yeah.
That I was like, all right, well, this is where I'm going to channel on my learning because I don't work with kids. And so I'm going to do it with the adults.
Yes.
And like the need is so high. So this was a very long way to get back to your question of like, why are people accepting of self-diagnosis?
I forgot about that question.
Put two ADHDers in a room together.
Love it.
But like people are accepting of self-diagnosis because like finding providers that are well-versed on it is really fucking hard.
Yeah.
Getting like access, it's expensive to get assessed. And many of us either don't take insurance or limit how many insurance spots we have because insurance like is such a horrible system that so underpays and puts so many like administrative hurdles in place. And so like access from that perspective is really hard. So you're going to get like invalidated. They're going to go off of like old info and then it's going to cost you a fucking fortune.
Yeah.
And so people have been doing their own research and people have been finding it for themselves and people have been like, yep, this resonates for me and I'm going to like act accordingly. And yeah, that's valid.
100%.
You are the best judge of your own experience.
Yeah, I love that so much.